Well, let's get started. I think I can keep this to 45 minutes. And the goal of this whole thing is to just give you a general sense of, you hear these terms and you know that you have a vague sense of some things of how they work. It's just to fill in the color. So we'll get started, and then you can stop me if you have any questions. But with that, let's just do a quick summary about how in the world does data move around networks and around the internet. So a lot of people will start with the idea that there's a loose connection between the way, postal system works and the way computer networks work. So take your example, you've got an envelope, it has a sender's address and it has a destination address. So in this case, that's what I showed you the other day, just a quick feel for this. Alice and Bob are friends from college. It's his birthday. She's in Bath, England. So she drops his birthday card into the post box and goes to the post office, and then it goes by train to London, and it goes from London to New York, and then all of a sudden it gets to New York, it gets to the post office, goes to the mail carrier, gets to the building with Bob, and Bob gets his birthday card. You're like, okay, so I understand that process. Well, in computer networks, you're not sending a birthday card, you're sending a packet. And packets are truly the basic unit of transportation, transport. And they're just a bunch of ones and zeros, and they contain a source address, they contain a destination address and the body. So everything on the internet is done in packets. Every web page, every file, every picture you receive from your cousin, it arrives as a series of packets, and everything you send out, every email leaves as a series of packets. So everything comes down to packets. So if you think about it in terms of that envelope analogy, you've got the postal system, it's an envelope and the card's inside, and you've got the sender's address and destination. Same thing here. You've got on a packet a header, and you've got a payload. And the header is basically the envelope, and the payload is the birthday card. So in addition to the sender's IP address, their address, and the recipient's address, it also has a packet sequence, the order packets need to arrive in. So that's a thing. So you get through and you go through and you say, well, how does it get where it's going? And it is this brilliant system called packet switching. And it's where message is broken up into little bitty bits and sent. So let's go back to that birthday card. You get the birthday card for Bob. Then you tear it up into a bunch of little bitty pieces. And then you put each little bitty piece in an envelope with Bob's address as the destination and yours as the source. And you send it the most direct way possible. And all those little bitty bits are reassembled in the proper order at their destination. And you're like, why in the world would you do that? But let's just say in this example, you want to send a 1 megabyte picture to Japan, to your buddy in Japan. Well, there's 8 bits in a byte. So there's 8 million bytes that need to be sent for this one kind of small picture. So the likelihood of something getting corrupted along the way is pretty significant. So if you tried to send it all in one go, you'd likely lose some bit of information, and then you'd have to resend the entire thing, and that would just be a big hassle. So instead, you split it up into smaller pieces. Just a fun fact, each Ethernet packet has a maximum size of 1,500 bytes. So how bad could it be? So if there's a problem with any packet, the end it says, I am missing this one, and you retransmit one small little bitty bit. So the big thing with packet switching, it's super efficient, it's cost effective, and it's scalable. So in the old days, if you wanted to transmit data between 2 points, you had to call the phone company, you had to get a dedicated line, and you can imagine that wasn't cheap. And so when you weren't sending anything, the line is empty. It's nothing's happening. So in order to bypass this whole thing, there came up with this idea that there's this big pipe and you can share the pipe. So it's like now multiple people, multiple businesses can throw their data onto one big pipe. It reminds me of in Nemo, the EAC, the Australian current, and they jump on the current and then they go real fast and then they get off the current and get to their destination. So I always think of it in terms of like just this huge highway. So the great thing about this is the pipe can be shared. So all the packets, as long as they have their address, they can, and protocols really are the secret to moving things along along the pipe. Then everything gets where it's going. So we have this other segment called Networking 201, and that's where it gets into the kind of the genius of the model that makes all that work. So we will, if anybody's interested, we could always go into the IP stack model in Networking 201. But let's take a deeper dive, more specifically into the home network. So here's Alice, and Alice lives on Spring Drive, and Alice has a ton of IoT devices. She's got a phone, gaming stuff. She's got printers, laptops. And, you know, some of those devices connect to a switch, which connect to a router. She also has a cool automation system. She's got the sprinklers, the thermostat, the cameras. It's awesome. And that too, some of those devices are hardwired to the switch. A lot of them work on wireless. And she's got this rockin' home theater thing going. So again, to the switch, to the router, through the modem, out to the internet. So all the devices are connected that way. As you can see, everything rides on that router. So, you know, as we know, computers communicate in packets. Packets need addresses. And so there's two types of addresses. There's an IP address, which is a unique address. It's assigned to every connected device on the internet, and it's all unique in order to get where it's going. You've got a MAC address, which is a physical address of, like, your phone has a MAC address, your laptop. It is issued by the manufacturer. So between the two, the packets get to where they're going. So right now, and for this course, we're just going to focus on the IP address. And then just remember that, you know, the router keeps track of the MAC IDs, and we will get into that one in other modules. So back to Alice's cool home network. This is how Alice sees her network. She's got her IoT devices. She's got her home theater. She's got her fridge, cameras, blah, blah, blah. This is how the router sees the network. It's all IP addresses. So again, every device connected has an address, and it allows everybody to find where they're going. So two things that you can remember about IP addresses: they're either public or they're private, and they are assigned either dynamically through DHCP or statically. So we'll talk about all this in a minute. But just real quick about, you'll hear IPv4 and you'll hear IPv6. And basically it has to do with the format. IPv4 are 4 octets. You know, you can see it expressed 192.168, you know, this could be triple digit, that could be triple digit. And the reason, when we first got, you know, the internet started taking off, we're like, oh, this is awesome. There's 4.3 billion possible combinations here. What could possibly go wrong? Well, now, you know, there's everybody. I have 3 devices I'm looking at right now. So you can see the problem. We started running out of IP addresses. And if everything on the internet needs one, this is a problem. So we came up with, you know, the powers that be came up with IPv6, which is 8 sets of 4, but and there's no shortage, and you can have up to 340 I don't even know how to pronounce that, undecillion, who knows? So that's, you know, in the works, but for right now in this course, we're going to talk about IPv4 because it's frankly something. So you've got a network address, in this case, 203.10.113. In the IPv4, this is the network address. Every network has a unique number. This is the host number. This is the thing that really gets down into the nitty-gritty. So I think of it in terms of like the network address is like a subdivision. It's like a street. And the street address, the host number, is the exact home or device. So it helps break this down into how people can find each other on the internet. So you hear about subnet masks, that sort of thing. We'll cover those in 201. But for the most part, you think of your network address, kind of this big chunk, and then you have your host number. So if you see that in action on a home network, you've got your modem there and you've got your public IP address going out to the internet. This is totally visible. Then you've got your private IP address. This is behind the router. So public addresses you can reach from anywhere. The private addresses are hidden behind the router. And again, the main reason we started doing this is because we were running out of IP addresses, and not everybody here needed one of those precious 4.3 billion addresses to be able to run their network. So when you look at here, the reachable part of the private part of the IP address, you've got the 192.168.2. But then if you look, no device, those last two numbers, no device has the same host number. And that is the way everything gets its own identifiable special number behind that main 192.168.2. So to take that a little further, it's kind of like being in an office building. The street address is public, but the suite numbers, you have to be inside the building to see them. Or if, you know, say you want to go and call somebody at work and you have their extension, well, you can only dial the extension once you're inside the phone network. You press 9, you dial the extension, and you can get through. So one thing you know about extensions, as we all know, no two employees can have the same extension. Same thing, no two devices can have the same host number. So you got that 192.168.2, that big block, and then you've got your individual host numbers. One last example, you're at Cedia and y'all are starving and you call Domino's and you get the pizza guy comes to the hotel, which is the 192.168.2, but without room numbers, he can't deliver your pizza. So again, the host number really helps you drill down. So how in the world do things find you on the internet if you have all these private IP addresses behind the router? And that's where network address translation comes in. So this is pretty brilliant. It was developed to conserve those IP addresses because we were running out. And so it also protects the privacy of your home network. So it kind of builds in a little layer there. But if you think about it in terms of you know, the envelope again, it's like having the destination address, but it's coming from anonymous. So no one can see you. So if they can't see you and you're expecting a response, they can't find you. So it's kind of like going back to this diagram, you got the public IP address and you got the private. I can get this far, but who do I send it to within the network? So how NAT works is the router has to do a lot of stuff. It translates the private IP address to a public IP. It sends the request out to the internet. It gets the response, translates the address, sends it back to the requesting device. So, and most home and SMB routers are NAT routers. So let's look at how that works. Alice wants to go and send, what is Alice doing here? I think she's going to a web page. So the router converts the 192.168.2.10, which is her laptop host number, and it goes to that public IP address that's on the other side of the modem. And it sends a request to YouTube saying, hey, Alice wants some of your stuff. So YouTube says, okay, great, here it comes. And the router translates the YouTube address. It sends that request to the router, which translates the public IP address back to Alice's particular device. So it makes it all very efficient. So you've got this pool of private addresses. But where do the private addresses come from? Where does that pool of 192.168.1.50 come from? And that's where he comes in with the DHCP server. So this is pretty cool. Every device, of course, needs an IP address, and it's the DHCP server's job to make sure that each device has a IP address, and every device on the network has a DHCP client on it. You know, the laptop has one, and you know, my daughter's laptop has one. Everything has one, and the DHCP server is built into the router. So you got your server, and then you have all your clients. So the DHCP server kind of just, you know, assigns these addresses dynamically. So let's just see how that works. It's a 4-step process, and it has like DHCP Discover, but basically what it's saying is one laptop says, hey man, I need an IP address. And it just broadcasts that whole request out to the whole network, and everybody ignores it except for the DHCP server. So the server in the router says, well, how would you like 192.168.2.30? It's like, I would love that one. So that's great. It's like, okay, that's great, but you can only have it until Tuesday at 5, but I'll check in with you to see if you need it longer. And so you've got this idea of a lease time, because you don't want an address in the precious pool of addresses just sitting there and not being used. So the router also keeps track of the lease times, and it's saying, okay, I gave this IP address to this MAC address, which was the MAC address of my laptop, and it's going to expire at this time, but I'm going to check in about halfway through that lease, still see if they still need it. If they don't, then I'm going to return that to the pool of available IP addresses so that other hosts can use them. So the lease really prevents a lot of wasted addresses in case a device is unplugged or never used and all that good stuff. So DHCP is really, really very cool. It's easy, it's automatic, it's scalable. But then sometimes some installations, especially home installations, especially with their controller, they need a reliable address. They can't just be having random addresses, because how is the home theater system going to contact the controller? It's like they really need something very predictable and reliable. So the idea is to always give the same IP address at all times to a particular device. And that's where DHCP reservations come in. So in this case, DHCP reservations allow you to assign a fixed IP address to one site, and that to one device, and that device will always have that same address. Very, very convenient. The alternative to DHCP reservations are static IP address, and static IP addresses, that's it can be a bummer. They don't change, and that's great. And it used to be the way they had to assign all IP addresses, but it didn't take too long to realize this could be a mess. It's like you had to manually, it was time consuming to configure and track them. You had to manually assign them. And then you had to make sure you never assigned a duplicate, which good luck. And then if the network changes, you have to manually assign them all over again. So they're still used. It's not scalable, but for the most part, in home AV environments, you're going to see DHCP reservations instead. So let's see where we've been so far. Every device has a unique address. The address can be either public or private. NAT translates the private IP address to a public IP address so people can find us. The DHCP server doles them out like hotcakes to all the devices on that local network. And then you can actually create a fixed IP address through DHCP reservations for those devices that need it. So how does all this work if Alice wants to go to YouTube? One thing about the way the internet works is protocols are the things that kind of move things around. It's the rules that make everything work and not become, devolve into chaos. So, we've covered a couple of those protocols, NAT and DHCP. That's inside the local area network. And then there's others you may have heard of, protocols that use on the internet, HTTP or HTTPS, SMTP, which is a protocol for email, DNS, which we'll cover in a second. So going back to Alice, she wants to go to YouTube. What's involved in making that happen? Well, web pages are written in HTML. That's how you make a beautiful web page. And the HTTP and HTTPS, the hypertext transfer protocol, and the secure on the S, everything is really HTTPS now. It's a secure form of sending it along. The page is written in HTML. You use HTTP to push it down the highway. So Alice wants to go to YouTube. Her computer sends the request using HTTPS, as in HTTPS youtube.com. YouTube receives the request, says sure, responds, and sends the web page in HTML back to Alice's computer, and then she gets the YouTube page. But wait, how does her computer find YouTube? She's typing in youtube.com. What does that mean? Well, this is enter the domain name system, the DNS. It's the difference between web host names and IP addresses. Alice thinks in terms of youtube.com. YouTube thinks an entirely different, that's YouTube's address. We think in terms of names, computers think in terms of numbers. Names don't change, but IP addresses can change. YouTube's IP address can change. And also, who wants to keep a book of their favorite, websites in a list and identify them by numbers? It's kind of like the old days with a phone book, which is mystifying to me that we actually had so much information at hand to people. But anyway, you had a phone book, you knew the name, you might know the street, but that's about all you knew. But you could look up this phone book and you could get the exact details. So DNS is basically the phone book for the internet. It's the protocol that turns domain names into IP addresses and allows humans to get to the websites and other internet sources. So when you type in that URL in the browser, it does a DNS query to see what IP address is at this moment associated with youtube.com. First place it'll look is in your browser's cache. It'll see if you've ever been there before and it's still there. But if not, it has to go to a DNS server, and there's scads of them all over the place. And through a series of steps, it resolves the domain name and translates it to an IP address. It is the largest database in the world, and this all happens in fractions of a second. And like I said, DNS servers are everywhere, and you can go to the nearest DNS server or one that is assigned to you. And we'll get into that more into Networking 201. So now the circle's complete. Alice wants to go to youtube.com. The router converts her private IP address to a public IP address, and then does the DNS lookup, sends the request to YouTube, sends the request over to YouTube. YouTube knows the public IP address Alice has, responds using HTTPS, sends the web page back to her. The router translates the public IP address back to her private address using NAT. The router then translates the, I'm sorry, then because of the DHCP address that has been doled out, it knows where to get to Alice, and then the web page arrives. And it's all very tidy. So all of that takes place just to have these transactions. But a couple more ideas we'll leave you with real quick, but it's definitely a topic for another day, is the idea on other networking terms that you'll probably have heard: VPNs and VLANs. VPNs, virtual private networks. As George says, we're not talking about the geolocation trickery where you pretend you're in Spain so you can see the NBA finals, or those kind of things. What we're talking about is, I've got two locations, maybe a vacation home and a main home, and I want to connect them together. Maybe I want to work from home and I want to connect to my office. So a VPN is a virtual private network. It's like our friend Jonathan used to say, it's like taking one big long cable and connecting it from your office, taking it down the highway and plugging it into your house. You are connected, you are encrypted, you're very secure. It takes a lot of resources on the router. So VPNs, very secure. They can slow down your router if it's not up to snuff. The idea of a VLAN, it's a collection, it's a virtual it's a virtual local area network. It's like taking disparate devices and putting them together in this virtual plane. And it's kind of like if you want to put all your guests, create a guest network for, so anything that anyone you don't recognize gets thrown into a VLAN that way, or you want to segregate a printer access so that only people in accounting can access this one, printer, and it's just a way to divide things up on the network. It's resource intensive, and we'll cover these a little bit more in Networking 201. So based on all that, that is like the inner networking, the inner workings of the network as you know it. I can pause if you have any questions, or I can go on to this one other section for networking components. Are y'all still with me? Everything seem okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Cool. All right. Hi, Tom. Tom has joined us.
Hi, Tom.
So,
DSG team.
there you go. Networking components. These are some of the things that the nuts and bolts that hold this thing together. So you walk into just about any network and you're going to see devices connected in the LAN. You're going to see a Wi-Fi access point, that lets the wireless devices talk to each other. You're going to see some cables, probably see a switch. You got a router, and then you go have a modem, and goes out to the internet. So let's look at all of these things. The LANs connect to the devices, got the radio waves, you do all that good stuff. So let's go and talk about each part of these components. You got cabling. So you got Ethernet cabling, and it allows you to connect your computer to the internet, your other devices to each other, your switch. It's faster than Wi-Fi connections, and it's usually more stable. You'll hear different versions of this. You've got coax cable. That's usually what you see connecting to a modem. You got fiber optic cable, and that's incredible, distances and speeds usually. You've got unshielded twisted pair, and as George says, the twist eliminates the jitter and the interference. So that's just a real common UTP type cable, and then you've got the patch cable that goes with the connectors that go to the switches. So the thing to remember about cables is length of cable, the data rate it has, the shielding it has, and where it'll be installed. So there's just a few rules about it. Mainly cable lengths. It's a max distance of 328 feet, which is 100 meters. And anything that you try to do longer than that's going to reduce the performance. It's going to cause signal loss. And you can couple them together with a, just a RJ45 connector, a little coupler, and you can extend your cable. So there's cable length. The main thing is just don't be out of spec with your cabling, because you don't want to go chasing a bunch of problems that turns out it all comes down to your cable. I like this slide just because it has a lot of history. Back in the 80s, it was the Cat 1, because cables are divided into categories. And, right now we're all the way up to Cat 8. But what I'm amazed at is even like in the 90s, each category has a max data rate, a bandwidth, and a max distance. But check out how much it's improved. I mean, it's gone from 10 megabits per second in the early 90s to, we're up to 40 gigabits per second, gigabits, 16 megahertz all the way to 2000 megahertz. So you can see the stuff changes. And the area that we live, this home automation space, really is this 5E, and 6. And that's where you'll see it. And those are the data rates that it has. And so cabling makes a difference. You may have heard of PoE, power over Ethernet. It's a way of mainly conserves outlets. So, how many times have you tried to plug something in and you don't have an outlet and you have to figure that out? So with PoE, it's getting its power over Ethernet. And so no electricians are required. It saves you time and money. You don't have to worry about outlets as much. You can position things exactly where you want them because you're not tethered to an outlet. It's safer. There's no high voltage power sources. You don't have to worry about power overload. They're reliable. And also you can throw a universal power supply on them, and you won't have any power failure. And they're scalable. You can put a bunch of stuff out there. As you can imagine, it's a little more expensive, so as always, but you may run into those terms as well. Switches, we'll touch on switches real quick. A switch basically connects a bunch of devices together to create a network. And there's two types. There's unmanaged and there's managed. And they differ, of course, with capability, security, cost, and complexity. So when you look at unmanaged switches, they're based, I don't know, Georgia has a great analogy. It's kind of like you need more outlets. I got 4 devices. I got a 2 outlet plug. I'm going to get myself a power strip and I'm going to plug them in. And it's kind of like that. It's like you plug them in, it gives you something to be able to forward traffic to these devices, but they don't do much. They don't have any security capabilities, but they're inexpensive and they're really easy to install. Managed switches are a lot more sophisticated. You can configure each port to do all kinds of stuff. There's security built into each of these. You can say who can talk to whom and data rates that you want them to do that at. They're more expensive. They require more expertise to provision, and of course, more expertise usually results in more cost for staff. But networking 201, we get a lot into the switches. But the main thing is, like, why are they so smart? They use the SNMP protocol, yet another protocol, and that protocol collects data about the network. It collects data for the devices. It determines the status of all of them. They can manipulate the ports, monitor the devices on those ports. They can do all kinds of stuff. So you can, as you can see here, on an unmanaged switch, it doesn't have any SNMP support, usually doesn't have any VLAN support. And basically maintaining your MAC address is like, okay, these are the MAC addresses I have. But a managed switch, yeah, SNMP support, supports VLANs and all these other things that that we'll get into in another course, but so that gives you a sense of switches. Then we've got Wi-Fi. That's another component. Wi-Fi is based on the IEEE 802.11 family of standards, and that it's basically it's allowing digital devices to exchange data via radio waves. And one thing about Wi-Fi, you've got a ton of different standards you've got that are based on range, interference, compatibility with each other, and it seems like the Wi-Fi standards are constantly changing. You know, Wi-Fi 7 is soon to be coming out, and you know, its claim to fame is it's faster. It's like 2.4 times faster than 6, although 6 is now touting some of Wi-Fi 7 speeds. Wi-Fi 7 is going to have greater bandwidth, so you know, each individual device will have more bandwidth to use. It's kind of it's like going from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road. And then you've got higher density. You can basically have a 20% higher transmission rate. So it's like a 3D kind of thing. It's just, but Wi-Fi 7, in any of the Wi-Fi standards, it's getting pretty fast. It'll never be as fast as wired devices. And that's why for wired routers like ours, you know, we decouple the Wi-Fi from the router because we just want to unburden it from all this. The other thing is, you know, you've heard of APs and meshes, access points versus a mesh. You know, the network gets their signal from either the access points or the meshes or even a wireless router. Mesh networks, they're a little more expensive, but they typically offer more consistent performance. They have better coverage. They have a centralized management so that you can easily you know, install them, provision them, and then they operate off one SSID. Access points they're individual, so requires a little bit more proficiency to set them up, to get the coverage right. So in general, I think in the AV world, we run into mesh networks a little bit more often. And a lot of these wireless devices, they include the router function, which results in a ton of trade-offs, usually not advantageous to the routing situation, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The last piece on this is the idea of modems and internet service speeds. So you've got your network, you know, you've got your switches all lined up, you got your Wi-Fi. The other piece of this is the modems and the ISP's role in all of this. So 2 things when you order service, you're either provided with a standalone modem, so you'll need to bring in a separate router or AP's mesh router combination, or they will provide you with what we call it an all-in-one or a combo unit. It's the modem router Wi-Fi unit all together. And it has what you need, but when you want to use your own router, you have to configure it to a bypass mode. One thing about ISP provided equipment, it's not always enterprise grade. It's often used, and it's definitely not necessarily up to date. So there is kind of that issue with what you get from the provider, especially in very expensive networks. The other aspect of what the ISP provides to you is you have to choose a data plan. And so usually you choose that plan based on speed and services that come with it. You know, anything 100 megabits per second, it's good. It's fine with multiple devices. 500 to 1,000 is awesome, and you would be able to do just about anything you need. So typically, of course, the faster the connection, the more you pay. But it's not just about the speed you're getting from your provider. It's efficiency matters, and that comes back to the router again. It's just because you're getting multi-gig speeds coming your provider doesn't mean you get multi-gig speeds on your network. Now, I love George's analogy. Why is a smaller, much smaller Porsche engine faster than like the Chevy big block that's huge? It's twice as big. This thing is more efficient. The Porsche engine is just much more efficient. You take an engine that says it's 500 horsepower, 500 horsepower, but by the time it gets through the axle, it gets through the transmission, and it gets to the wheels, before it's done anything, you've already lost 50 horsepower. So it's the same way with routers. There's so much resistance present on the network. So even though they advertise multi-gig speeds, it's like the quarter pounder always has the asterisk, George says. It's like, that's the wait before cooking. So it's by the time you add the resistance of the VPNs and the VLANs and the logging and, oh my gosh, everything, your multi-gig input can often, with an inefficient router, take you down to less than even a gig. So, and certainly inexpensive non-enterprise grade routers don't have the efficiency to keep up. So why are we telling you all of this? And as you remember from the previous slides, everything, your entire network rides on the router. So what we like to tell people is choose wisely. It's your router acts as a traffic comp. It directs data where it needs to go, and routers need horsepower, they need efficiency, reliability, and scalability. But they can also get very complicated. So it would be nice not have to have a PhD to install and use these things. So in terms of island, this is kind of like the reference for this, again, horsepower, efficiency, reliability, and scalability are key. Remember all those packets? I mean, that one 1 megabit photo had 8 million. So, it's all about the packets. We have 2 million packets per second. That is our throughput. We have packets screaming through the router, and it's not just raw throughput. It's with all the features enabled. It's with your VLANs. It's with your VPNs. It's with all the load on the network. And that's, again, we wired by design because we wanted to unburden the Wi-Fi capability. Let Wi-Fi do Wi-Fi. We're concentrating on these packets. So, so that is your horsepower. It's extremely important. You don't want to get bogged down into a lot of network drag. We have 165,000 connections per second. So what does that mean? When you go to YouTube or when you go to weather.com, oh my gosh, they have a bazillion little bitty, they have ads, and they have, these tracking cookies, and they have all kinds of stuff. So to actually make that page, render that page, you've got hundreds of objects coming in all at once. And each of those is a connection. We can maintain 165,000 connections per second. I think the fastest I've seen is about a third of that on other routers. The one thing you'll find, they don't publish these numbers. A lot of the competition does not publish these numbers, and they go by raw throughput. It's the patty before it's cooked. They go by raw throughput, but this is where the rubber meets the road, and you really start seeing your efficiencies. Island, there's no open source code. We did our own. It's not based on Linux or open on WRT, which most routers are. And the reason we did that is because we were in carrier networks for 20 years. We were in some of the largest brands in the world for 20 years before that. And you have to be, you don't take the network down to make a change. You don't update it, just willy-nilly. You have to be reliable. It has to be on always. And we support 5,000 devices. Some competitors have like 100 max device limit. We recently put a few of the competitors against, we have this $750,000, what do you call it, Tom? It's the
Keysight Technologies Perfect Storm.
and it was amazing how, as you start pouring packets through this thing to see what happens to some of these products, the Sonic Wall, it stopped responding after a while. You couldn't even use the network management interface. The Arachnus just started going, just really erratic, just started sawtoothing all over the place. It's just when you start pouring data through there, and networks are getting more and more sophisticated every day. So today's home network is really a branch office. It's an extremely resource intensive area. But then there's the other component about hardware architecture. Why does it matter? And it matters a great deal, because if you want to get the reliability and the efficiency, and you don't want to see the data sawtooth all over the bench test. Just to give you an example, Island has a quad core 64-bit processor. Ragnus has a dual core, and it's only ours is 1.8 gigahertz. This is 880 megahertz. We got 4 gig of error correcting memory. Remember the packets and trying to detect the errors. We have error correcting memory. No one does. But that helps encapsulate any errors and fix them before they even go out. We have 72-bit of RAM. We're talking 16-bit of RAM and half a gig as opposed to 4. You got 64 gigabyte of flash storage. This is 64 megabytes. We have and little touches too. Internal battery to retain the time if it's ever powered off. We got internal power supply. We got USA made. So when we cracked open the Arachnus, that's what you find in it, and it does matter. But the thing I think for us, we've been doing this a long, long time, and we know routing, we know networks, and when you look at the router interfaces out there, they're just exhausting. And everybody's throwing out speeds and feeds and all this tech speak, and I swear to you, it's just to confuse us. But we have a long history of making hard technology easy. We know networks, we know what's needed to be baked into the router that's pre-configured and automatic. And we feel like with that set of configuration and best practices that we've baked into the router, just about anything you need to do can be handled with a tap and a swipe. So it's taking all the sophistication and presenting it in a way that is easy to where you guys can focus on the other stuff, because you got a ton of stuff. You got the shades and the thermostats, you got all of it. So that